The meeting's now live.
Thank you so much, Anna. Good afternoon and welcome to the virtual meeting of the Education Advisory Board. I'm Councillor Susie Horton and I'll be chairing today's meeting. Members of the public are invited to view this meeting. If I could ask that those present could keep their microphones on mute and to only turn them on when they are called to speak, and as this will limit the amount of background noise. Members are requested to keep their cameras turned on at all times. Officers and presenters are requested to turn their cameras on only when they're presenting, but actually that's fine by me if you want to be visible the rest of the time. Members and those wish to speak should use the chat function, which is a prompt to me to actually show the chat function. To write their names followed by RTS, request to speak. Please don't use the chat for anything else, etc., etc. I think we know all that. Each time you speak, please say who you are so it's clear who is speaking. And I will monitor the chat. If there are technical difficulties, we will endeavour to resolve these and where necessary have a brief adjournment, but the meeting can proceed when we're quorate. Before I ask who's present, I'd like to welcome two members. One is Councillor Ryan Brent, who is the new chair of the Education, Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel. Hiya, Ryan, nice to see you again. And also we're welcoming Francis Soul, who is the new chair of the Portsmouth Education Partnership, who represents the partnership on this board. Welcome to Francis. Met you indirectly at the Portsmouth Education Partnership conference, but a warm welcome to this group. Please can I ask everyone taking part today to confirm that they are present, and I've actually got a list which I'll go through. Hopefully I won't miss anyone out. So I'm going to go straight to Councillor Ryan Brent.
Yep, I'm present.
Good afternoon and welcome. Terry?
Yes, present. Sorry, had trouble getting off mute there, but I'm present. Thank
welcome,
you.
Terry. Jeanette?
Councillor Jeanette Smith, present.
Welcome, Jeanette. Councillor Judith Smythe, is she here? Can't see her. So she will, hopefully she'll turn up a bit later. Okay, Alison Jeffrey, I don't believe is here because I think she's got another meeting.
She is hoping to join us later, but yeah, she's in the early help board at the moment, but should be with us maybe half an hour to an hour if the meeting continues to be on that time, of course.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Well, actually, you can now introduce yourself.
Okay, yeah, Mike Stoneman. I'm Deputy Director for Education.
Welcome. Debbie Anderson.
Hi, yes, Debbie Anderson, Head of School Improvement Early Years. I'm present.
Welcome, Debbie. Sarah?
Hi, Sarah Christopher, Portsmouth Education Partnership and School Inclusion Manager, present.
Welcome, Sarah. And Anna?
Yep, Anna Martin, Local Democracy Officer.
Okay, Francis is not on this list. So, Francis, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, Francis Soul, Chair of Portsmouth Education Partnership.
Welcome. Is there anyone else I have left off who's...
Yes.
Rob, sorry.
No problem. I do have to apologise. I have an Ofsted meeting at 5 o'clock, so I'll have to leave shortly before then if we're still going, but I'm here.
Okay, welcome to you, Rob. Anyone else? D4. Who's D4? Is that...
That's the shared box that's doing the live streaming.
I just didn't want to be rude. Welcome, D4. Right, okay, so we'll go to apologies for absence. I've mentioned Alison Jeffrey may be late, Helen Reader from Portsmouth Teaching School Alliance, and Anna, is there anyone else who sent their apologies?
Not I'm aware of, apart from Helen.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just for clarification, I think Helen Reader's from the Teacher Liaison panel rather than the Alliance. Yeah,
I did think that as I read it out. Okay, thank you, Mike, for that correction. Item 2, declarations of interest. I will kick off with my usual. I know the usual ones, but we'll see if anyone's got any additional ones. So I am Vice Chair of Governors at Craneswater Junior School. I'm going to go to Terry next because I know that he will have declaration of interest.
Yeah, thank you, Susie. I have a personal non-prejudicial interest in that I am employed at Mayfield School, albeit through an external company.
Thank you, Terry. And Jeanette?
Yeah, my normal one. I'm a full-time official for Hampshire branch Unison. So if there are any issues about from national policy about Unison, I might have to withdraw, but there's nothing on the agenda at the moment.
Thank you, Jeanette. Has anyone else got any declarations of interest?
I'm employed by Portsmouth College and Highbury College, soon to be one college.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Susie,
right.
I suppose I should just add that I'm a trustee at UTC Portsmouth. I better just add that one in.
Yes, indeed.
If that's needed.
And I work for Ofsted as an Ofsted inspector sometimes.
Look at all these interests. It's almost like we're all engaged in education in some ways. Fantastic. Okay.
I also have some, but I probably need to give a list to Anna or somebody. So do you need all of them?
Do you want to go for them?
Yeah.
For this
I'm
meeting?
trustee of Quorum Life Education. I'm trustee of Future Frontiers Careers Charity. I'm a consultant for Confederation of Schools Trust. I think they're the main ones, yes.
Thank you, Francis. Ask a busy person, as they say. That's brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Welcome, Judith. Do you want to introduce yourself with your official
Judith
title?
Smythe, member of this board and councillor for St Jude Ward. I'm very sorry I'm a little bit late.
It's okay. Do you have a declaration of interest in any of the meeting?
No, not currently. I have got experience of being a governing on a governing body, but not at the moment.
Thank you. Fabulous.
Sorry, before I need to interrupt you again, because I think I've got another community interest, because I am a trustee, and Councillor Brent sort of reminded me of this. I am a trustee of Portsmouth College, obviously dealing with the merger of the new college. So I think I'll have to declare that interest at this board.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think we're all declared now. Item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was on the 8th of February 2021. We need to ensure there's correct record of the meeting held on the 8th of February. Are there any comments from anyone who was at that meeting? I have read it and it looks like, as much as my memory can serve me, an accurate record. And yes, I can see nodding from people who were there, so that's great. So I'll now approve the minutes as a correct record unless anyone has any objections, which I don't think they have. Fantastic. Minutes are approved. So item 4 now is the response to COVID-19. And for those people who are new to this board, there was a version of this paper was presented in February and prior to that last year. And I have to say, when I read it, it's just really fascinating looking at the timeline and how the structure of that paper has been built on as we've sort of skimmed through the pandemic. So I'll hand over to Mike, who's presenting it, but it is a really, really good reminder of the enormous amount of work that's been going on.
Thanks, Susie. And just to mention, Susie, I'm not sure when we want to do this in the meeting, but we did just, I know it's not on the agenda, but we thought it might be helpful just to update board members with the sort of latest position in terms of Ofsted judgment, because we've just had UTC Portsmouth inspected with the report published yesterday. So, yeah, I just thought it might be helpful just to give you an update at some point during the meeting.
Do you want to do that now, Mike?
Shall I do now?
Just in case, well, otherwise sometimes we just get on with things and then we might forget. So go for it. And it seems a good thing to start on. So.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, a positive thing to say is that UTC Portsmouth had their, well, it's a Section 8 inspection to begin with, but it turned into a Section 5 when it was clear the school had made substantial progress, particularly around the issue of safeguarding, which is why it fell into an Ofsted category of inadequate. So it became a 2-day inspection, and the outcome of that is that the UTC Portsmouth is now an outstanding school. So, and in fact they got it outstanding across the board. So really positive result for UTC. So the report was published yesterday. It's not yet on the Ofsted website, but will be there shortly. The staff have now been informed, so that was good news. But just to give you a quick update in terms of where we are across the city. So the latest figures are, and this is based on inspected state-funded schools in Portsmouth. There is one school which we excluded, and that's Wimborne Primary, on the basis that it was, as you know, amalgamated recently. So we closed the infant and the junior school, and we reopened a new school, which was Wimborne Primary. And as a result, they haven't had an inspection. But to let you know that before the amalgamation, they were both good schools. So, but I have excluded them from the figures because that would bring the figures down, which isn't really helpful. And as I say, they're two good schools anyway. So in terms of the inspected schools, we're now at a point where we've got just under 92% of all schools in Portsmouth rated good or outstanding. So in fact, 91.7%. And if you look at percentage of pupils attending schools that are rated good or outstanding, that's at 93.4%. And that's pretty much some of the highest figures we've had in the city. We still have 5 schools that are not good or outstanding. So just to briefly go through those. So we have Castleview Academy, which is requiring improvement. Stamshaw Junior School requiring improvement. Milton Park Primary requiring improvement. And Westover Primary requiring improvement. We also do have one inadequate school, which is Corpus Christi Primary Catholic School. Although, having said that, the reason they became inadequate was to do with safeguarding again, systems not being robust enough, and they were therefore judged to be ineffective in terms of safeguarding, and that immediately means that leadership is inadequate, which obviously gives them the inadequate rating. So hopefully, when we do get back into the inspection cycle and they have a Section 18 inspection, I hope it goes the same way as UTC Portsmouth. I mean, certainly we've put a lot of support into Corpus Christi, and I am satisfied, and Debbie might want to add a few words, that they are now in a pretty good position. They have, as a result of being inadequate, and these are the vagaries of the system we now work in, they had to become an academy requested by the RSC. So they've now joined the Edith Stein Trust, which is effectively Oakland's school in Havant. So they're now part of that trust, but we still work very closely with them, despite the fact they're an academy. Debbie, do you want to say a few words about Corpus, just in terms of our confidence that they can turn this around?
Yes, I'm happy to. So I worked with the new head teacher there quite a bit. She was appointed in September last year. I did visits. I visited in person, and we met regularly. They've also been part of projects that I've been doing on literacy. So they've taken on Read Write Inc. as a phonics synthetic systematic program, which has helped them. And they're part of Destination Reader, which is a Key Stage 2 reading program. So that's certainly helped their literacy. But as I say, I have worked really carefully with the head teacher there, and before their academisation, which I think was the 1st of March. Was it the 1st of March? 1st of March. Yeah, I was happy with their progress. They had 2 Ofsted monitoring visits, one in the autumn and one in the early spring term, and both of those were successful and positive visits as well. So definitely moving in the right direction.
Thanks, Debbie. Okay, so that was a bit of an impromptu addition, so I hope that's okay. But we do normally update board members on Ofsted, and although we haven't had many inspections recently, I just thought it'd be helpful to do that. Okay, so turning back to agenda item 4 then, I'm not going to go through the whole report. What I'm going to do is concentrate on section 7, because as Susan...
Yeah, I've just realised I've just seen the RTS. So apologies, Jeanette.
All right, in order to ask questions on that part of the report, Ofsted.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. You said, Mike, that 92% of schools are good and outstanding, which is excellent news. But could you sort of just explain why attainment hasn't quite matched that level? Because there seems to be a disparity between good and outstanding schools and the level of attainment going on.
Yep. Well, there's no easy answer to that, and it's something we often refer to as the Portsmouth Paradox. We're in a position where we've got the majority of our schools rated good or outstanding, and in fact that's above the national average. Yet when you look at our attainment and progress figures, you know, we are often in the bottom 25% and indeed 10% on some measures. So attainment and progress has yet to really make the step change that we were hoping for. And it's a very complex answer to what sounds like quite a simple question. And there are a variety of factors at play here. I think attendance is a big issue, and we'll come on to that briefly later. So we still have too many children and young people who do not attend school regularly, particularly at the secondary level. And we have a high rate of fixed term exclusions in secondary. That undoubtedly has an impact on attainment and progress, and that's something which we're addressing. We've had a number of schools that were in really difficult circumstances a number of years ago, which had really pulled down our figures, and our figures were worse along some of those measures. Most of those schools have been taken on by academy trusts, and we are seeing improvements, but it is gradual. Trying to turn around failing schools takes time, but that is moving in the right direction. I just don't think we've yet seen the sort of product of that yet, but that I think will come through over the next few years. So yeah, there's a number of reasons, and of course the other thing we've seen is significant variations across the city. So we've seen some improvements in schools, and then unfortunately for whatever reason they've had a difficult year, a difficult cohort, and they've gone down again. So there's quite a lot of turbulence as well in the system, which doesn't help. But yeah, there is no easy answer to this. I mean, the education strategy, which we'll come on to later, and the priorities we're focusing on, we hope is going to make the difference and tackle those areas like attendance, literacy being another one which we just talked about. We're going to talk about peer review soon. We're going to talk about the application of digital technology, about how we can use that to make the changes we need. But it is a very, very complex area of work. I mean, Debbie, I don't know if you want to come in as a sort of head teacher, and having had 25 plus years in the city, you'll know this better than anybody.
Yeah, so it's not sometimes all about the quality of teaching and learning, which I think shines through in some of our inspections and how we do include all pupils, but it is about the impact of that in children achieving those expected standards. And the difference is not necessarily teaching to the test, but equipping children with the knowledge, skills, abilities, content to be able to prove in those measures that they can show that they do have those abilities. So it is a contradiction, and it is not easy, but obviously the data that we're working with is now 2019 data. We don't have any results from 2020 or 2021. So what we can do now is look at the education strategy and put into place the things that we think are important for teaching and learning to make the difference to those outcomes.
And just to add to what Debbie said in terms of the system we now operate under, so as you know, 2/3 of our schools are now part of multi-academy trust. So we have 13, we'll have 14 shortly with the University of Portsmouth Academy Trust, and we obviously hold those trusts, as does the RSC, to account, and the reason they are there is to drive school improvement. That's their main focus, and so we will expect to see improvements across those trusts. And then for the remaining LA maintained schools, which comes under sort of Debbie's responsibility in terms of our targeted school improvement, we will be obviously focusing on those schools where we know they need additional help, and where we need to drive improvement and change. So there's a lot of work focusing on this. You know, it's something which we wrestle with every year, and we're doing our best to put everything in place to make that change happen. But yeah, it's a frustrating one, Jeanette. Really is. Yeah.
I see that Terry has wants to say something. After Terry's asked his question, can I suggest that we go on to the reports, because a lot of this is going into the second report around. I know we chose to make the announcement, but with hindsight, maybe it should have been an AOB. But a lot of this is related to the second report around the strategy. So I'll go to Terry though, because he's asked to speak. Terry.
Thank you, Susie. Yeah, I'm just going to build on what Jeanette raised, really. We've been here a number of times before, haven't we, with attainment in the city, and I just worry that we're not really making any progress, really. I'm going to come back to that idea and that suggestion that there are children in worse off places, in tough areas of London, that are living on the 19th story of tower blocks, that are being brought up by brothers and sisters that do achieve, and yet children that are particularly well off in Portsmouth don't. And I think the question for me is, what are we doing to work with our statutory neighbours to look at where these things, where schools do get it right in tough areas where parents are demotivated and all those sort of things, because we don't seem to be moving anywhere, making any progress really. And it's misleading, I think, for us to talk about Ofsted and our Ofsted results, and parents to think that they're sending kids to outstanding schools when their attainment is a lot lower than statutory neighbours. So what are we doing to work with them and to look at where it works in other areas, because it feels like we're not really making any progress.
Okay, thanks, Terry. I think fair challenges. I do think the fact that the progress may have been impacted by the pandemic over the last few years, in terms of the fact that we haven't actually got any progress to demonstrate, because there haven't been any many of those external measures. That is part of it. But no, I think some of the key points that you made were absolutely right.
Sorry,
Okay,
Susie, I will come back if you don't mind. Sorry, I'm going to come back very, very quickly. Sorry to interrupt, but when we do get those results for 2020 and 2021, they're not really going to be reflective, are they? They're going to be either inflated or inconsistent. What I don't want us to do is to walk away and say, look how well we're doing, when it's not really reflective of an honest situation, really. So that's just me saying I don't want us to rely on those results, given it was such a difficult time.
Well,
and unlikely to be.
And to be honest, we're not really looking at those results. I mean, we'll wait to see what the results look like in 2022. Absolutely, but to reassure you, Terry, we are not taking our foot off this pedal. We know, and in fact, we requested a meeting with the schools minister just a few months ago to say, look, whilst we don't have any results yet, we can only go on what we did in 2019. We know this isn't good enough. We want everybody to get behind this wheel, and we need government support as well. I mean, yes, I take your point about looking at other local authority areas with maybe a similar sort of demographic, socio-economic profile. But again, it's just not that simple. In some of those areas you mentioned, like London, if you look at the funding rates, for example, for pupils, significantly more than we get in Portsmouth. Now, whilst the government is trying to do something about that in terms of a level playing field, we're still some way from that. So there are massive differences, and it is very, very complex. But what I would say, if you look across other areas like Portsmouth along the south coast, for example, look at the likes of Hastings and Medway, areas like that, very similar sort of results to what we've got. It's not an excuse. I'm just saying, there are similar challenges in other local authorities, particularly where you've got significant proportions of white British boys, which we have. They particularly do badly, and that's a sort of a national issue. So yeah, it's very complex. That's all I can say. But it's not an excuse. It's something which we are absolutely focused on.
Okay, so shall we go to the report then, the first report, Mike?
Yes. So just to echo what I said at the start, I'm going to just focus on section 7, because the rest of the report we've gone through before with you when we met in the autumn and the spring term. So this is focusing really on what's happened since schools reopened on the 8th of March. So I'll just take you through the key points in section 7. So just going back to the 8th of March, which might seem like a lifetime ago, but that's when schools reopened after the last lockdown. And we got off to a pretty good start, actually, in terms of attendance. I mentioned some of the issues around attendance, but attendance was really high, actually, in those first few weeks and months. And in some cases, 100% schools were reporting. And that was in part due to the fact we'd done a lot of work with our schools to support the reopening of schools. We had the sort of Welcome Back campaign previously, then we had the Ready to Start campaign to reassure parents who were anxious about sending their kids back to school. And I think we did a pretty good job working with our schools to reassure parents about the safety of schools after the 8th of March. We also, just in terms of looking at attendance, we worked with a company called StudyBug, who work in a number of other local authority areas, where we entered an agreement with them to give us access to live attendance data. We do get this data through our regular data feeds we get from schools, but it's usually 2 or 3 weeks behind where it needs to be. But through StudyBugs and the system they have, where they can effectively link into the management information systems of each school. And it doesn't matter what sort of system it is, they can extract the data. They can give us live attendance data each day, which is incredibly useful, particularly for our link coordinators who are attached to each school and who we put in place at the start of this pandemic, to make sure that we are absolutely on top of those young people, particularly our most vulnerable young people who perhaps are not in school, and alive to that, and obviously we then can inform social workers, lead professionals about those issues. So that was a really good step for us, and we're reviewing how that's going. It's been very positive. We've had all of our schools bar one sign up. So St Edmunds, for whatever reason, decided not to sign up to that, although we'll be going back to St Ed's because it has been a very successful pilot. And we've now committed to a 2-year relationship with Studybugs. So that's something which we've just agreed in the last few weeks. So that's good. Another key focus, obviously, during the summer term was on testing and vaccinations, spring and summer term, and I've just set out there some of the work we've done to support the testing in secondary schools. We also introduced weekly saliva testing as part of a pilot with the University of Southampton. 3 of our secondary schools took part in that. And we also prioritised the introduction of lateral flow testing for early years staff as well, ahead of the community testing programme, which our early years providers welcomed. On the vaccinations front, we prioritised those education-based staff who work closely with clinically vulnerable children. So that included all our special school staff, but also staff in our mainstream schools that work with those children, and also our passenger assistants on the homeschool transport. So they were all given a first dose of the vaccine before they were able to access that through the national programme. We've also, with the council, adopted the local zero waste policy, which gave teachers who were over the age of 50 a priority for vaccine appointments where they were available. And again, really well received by schools, and many of our teachers benefited from that early on in the programme. So lots of work around testing and vaccinations. Another positive development, which we've been running throughout this year, has been the food vouchers for free school meal pupils, and we were able to offer that again during the February half term, Easter holidays, and the May half term. And the good news is that we're now able to offer that for the whole of the summer holiday period as well, 6 weeks. That's not just to school age children, but it's also to early years children as well. So that's a really positive development, and we'll be using Eden Red again to deliver that during the summer. 7.10, the paragraph 7.10, we've done a lot of work in terms of supporting our 16 to 18-year-olds in recognition of the fact that we've got rising numbers of young people who are NEET, so not in education, employment and training. We've had an established youth NEET prevention programme, and I'll be talking a bit about that later, which we've been leaning into and extending to make sure that all year 11s in particular who are vulnerable to not getting a positive post-16 destination are given the support they need to make sure they do get that. And we've also introduced with the colleges the Flying Start programme, which includes a website where year 11s and parents can access a whole range of information, support and resources to support transition. So lots of work going on there to support transition to post-16. The next 2 items, I might just bring in Sarah, because you're probably going to be sick of my voice. So if I just bring in Sarah, just talk a bit about the work we've been doing around the prejudicial language and behaviour toolkit and the work around mental health. Sarah, do you just want to say a few words about that?
Sure. So along with national picture, there's an expectation around rise in some prejudice-based incidents alongside the return to school. So we have relaunched our prejudicial language and behaviour reporting tool. As members might know, there is no requirement for schools to report incidents. That was scrapped by the government a number of years ago, and schools continue to hold that information, but we've asked our heads to provide that information to us where there have been prejudice related incidents, so that we can look at how we respond across the piece in terms of training and resources and so on. Our heads are engaged with that. It's very much, it's not about saying that if your school reports racial incidents, it is a problem with racism in the school, because actually often the more you talk about it, the more training and the more awareness you do, the rates quite often go up, because people are more alert and more aware to it. So it's about making sure that we're starting to get a better picture. So a report's going to be produced at the end of the term with figures, but we're getting monthly returns from a number of our schools. Most of the responses that we're getting, about 50% are saying they haven't had any incidents, and the ones that are getting are mostly race related, with a couple for gender and sexual orientation. So we're continuing to build that with our heads, but alongside that we're also doing work around preventing and responding to prejudice-based incidents. So a particular focus at the moment on some of the work around racism and anti-racism. We had some fabulous work produced by children and young people across the city as part of UN Anti-Racism Day, and a great display, socially distanced of course, down on the seafront, with work all around Canoe Lake and all along the seafront on the actual day itself, which was fantastic. And I know lots of schools also did work within that. And then we have a working group co-producing some guidance. A lot of schools are asking for more support around how to respond to some quite nuanced conversations, and increasing staff confidence who want to be able to challenge those and have those conversations, because it's not just about saying don't do this, it's about educating and making sure that even if there isn't a racist intent behind prejudicial language, actually if the impact is that someone understands that it's racism and feels discriminated against, we need to deal with that, but at the same time educating the person who might be saying something that is wholly inappropriate. So we're putting together a resource pack. We've got lots of examples of work from different schools, curriculum resources, all obviously age appropriate, but going from really quite young children, because one of the teachers in one of our schools locally has done some really good research about challenging stereotypes from a really young age, and how that can have a huge impact on longer term outcomes. So we have a draft resource pack out for some consultation with some schools at the moment, and we hope to have that ready for September. And there will be training in support of that as well. A number of schools have requested whole staff training, and that's great. And that's not just about teaching staff, that is about whole staff as well, including site services, reception and so on. So that's very, very encouraging. And we're linking in with other pieces of work like the Portsmouth Black History Project and so on as well. And then going on to 7.10, mental health support teams. We are one of the few areas, and I should just double check this, as I'm not sure whether there are any other areas that have full coverage of mental health support teams, but we have now recruited to the third team. They are in training. What that means is that all schools in Portsmouth are able to make referrals into mental health support teams. There has been some delay in rolling that out due to the pandemic and the challenges of getting people into schools, but actually those relationships are being built, and that's coming along since people have gone back to school in full time in March. Then actually that's coming along quite rapidly. And as well as that, is looking as a really quite exciting piece of work about unpicking some of the pathways around mental health and emotional support, because there is a perception that the gold standard in mental health support is CAMHS, and we know that despite the waiting lists in Portsmouth being significantly lower than lots of other areas, for a young person or a family in need of mental health support, even a short waiting list feels like far too long for those people, and there is that sometimes that expectation that people feel like what they want is CAMHS, or what they need is CAMHS. The piece of work we're doing around the pathways is saying that yes, some people do need CAMHS, but actually that's part of a continuum of support. We've got mental health support teams, we've got a whole load of other resources like Kooth with online counselling, we've got lots of self-help resources, we've got lots of school-based resources as well, and we're trying to clarify because it can get very confusing. One parent describes it as trying to follow a recipe without trying to cook a complicated meal without actually having a recipe. So we're looking at clarifying that and working in co-production with parents so that we get that clarification about the different bits of mental health support available. But the addition of the mental health support team is fantastic. I think that's it from me. Brilliant. Mike.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to echo what Sarah said about the prejudicial language and behaviour toolkit, we're now getting results in from the online forms that schools are completing, and there are a significant number of incidents out there, and schools in the early briefings we had with them were saying, look, this has become an issue as we're coming out of lockdown. So we are watching that carefully, monitoring it, and that is informing how we support schools around this agenda. So yeah, it's a really important one. The last paragraph, 7.11, just talks about the work we've been doing to support digital learning, application of digital learning, which builds on all the work we've done throughout the year. And although obviously the majority of pupils were in school after the 8th of March, we were still having a number of pupils out of school for a variety of reasons, self-isolation being one of those, and of course that has increased substantially over the last few weeks, and so that the importance of having a good remote access education offer is still there. But of course we want to build on what we've done over the last year and to have a really strong digital learning offer next year, because whether you're in school or out of school, it doesn't really matter. We believe that a really strong offer in digital learning is going to support the curriculum in school, and also support, for example, home working at school, at home. So we're putting a lot of support into that. We've got the relationship with the Thinking Schools Academy Trust that have been delivering a contract for us and on behalf of the partnership, supporting schools to develop their offer. And we've also been doing quite a bit of work to make sure that all children and young people have access to a device, and also access to the internet, of course. And that work continues. And yeah, I'll come on to it later, but we launched at the PEP Summer Conference, was it last week or the week before, our intentions for next year around digital learning, and I'll pick that up in the next report. But that concludes really a summary of the support we put in place over the last term or so since schools reopened back in March. Happy to take any other questions.
Thank you, Mike. Terry, you've got a question or a comment?
Yeah, I've got a few questions, if that's okay, if you don't mind bearing with me. So the first one is on paragraph 7.8. It talks about the free school meals vouchers. Mike, remind me how we distributed those. Are there any stats in terms of uptake? There was obviously a lot in the press about it. We had motions at full council. What was the uptake like, or was it simply just paid in generically?
Yeah, I mean, the uptake was incredibly high. I probably could get out the figures. I think it was something like 98%. I mean, it was really high uptake. It was through Edenred that we did it, so schools basically had access to the account and were able to, from that, give parents the codes they needed to then access the vouchers. But the uptake was really high. Yeah, I can't give the precise figures, but it was something in that sort of region. Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks. And another one for you, Mike, if I can, and I'll come back to Sarah, is around the laptops and the devices. Did we get all of the government devices that we were promised?
We did, yes.
Okay.
It wasn't enough, but yeah, we got the allocation, and that went out to schools and children and young people. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And then two for Sarah, if that's okay. Sarah, the first one is about 7.11 and the anti-racism work. So obviously we've had lots of work going on recently. We've just come out of LGBT month as well. We're saying that the schools are asking for staff training, but I'm right in thinking they've not had it over the last few years. Obviously staff don't meet on whole at the moment in schools. So when are we likely to get some staff training out for all of those sort of issues? I know that recently we've looked at some stuff in schools and staff just don't have the answers, that they're not keeping up. We can't assume that they're keeping up with moving trends and words and things. And I don't want children to be sat in schools with staff not knowing the answers. So when are we likely to have staff training to all schools?
As soon as heads ask for it. Literally, someone just needs to say, can you come and do some training? And it's available. So some of this training has been available for a number of years. So particularly around LGBTQ plus training, we had an offer a little while ago, and there's continual offers. I had an email from a school a couple of weeks ago saying, who can you signpost me to for this, that and the other? And we have a specialist team within Early Help who do a lot of work and training with schools. So we have had some particular requests recently around anti-racism training. So we've put a package together, and when we launch this guidance in September, we would very much encourage people to do training around that rather than just taking a pack in. Training in and of itself is not going to change a culture of a school. It is very much about the culture, so it's part of an ongoing piece of work. But the offer will absolutely be there and will be publicised in September. But it is just a case of heads dropping me an email, and we'll get something out there.
Great. And with the lack of assemblies and kids meeting, on a whole, en masse, to have specialists come in and deliver training, have we still been able to do that across schools? Have we got specialists in the council that haven't been able to deliver their usual programme because they can't get into schools, or has it all just moved online?
Mostly it's moved online, actually. I was talking with my PSA development colleagues, so she does a lot of the work directly, curriculum stuff, and yes, a lot of that has moved online, and in some ways it's made it easier. So I know we had an assembly aimed at primary schools developed by one school, but around during LGBT History Month in February, absolutely gorgeous assembly that we were able to share with all sorts in real life. So we will hopefully continue with some things like that alongside the offer of face-to-face training, because I think training around equalities issues, you need that detailed and in-depth discussion that you can't do through remote delivery.
No, absolutely. And I think for me, it's just about, children at home who parents may have, discriminatory views and all that, coming into school and a teacher handling it not as confidently as they may because they've not aware themselves. So I mean, that's where I can't get with that.
No, that's exactly one of the scenarios that we cover in the guidance, and looking at actually when very young children make comments and they don't really realise the impact of what they're saying, and when people are repeating parents' views, how that is challenged in a way that is not disrespectful to the parents.
Yeah, great. And just one more on CAMS, if that's okay. So do we know how long the waiting list is? Is there an average time or number?
It absolutely varies. So if you've gone for an autism and ND referral, it's a lot longer, but there's a lot of additional resource gone into that. What I can say is they are dealing with young people in crisis very, very quickly. What they are doing is having to hold young people who are not in crisis a bit longer, but they are absolutely prioritising, and they are also able to offer consultation and support and advice to anyone during that waiting period. And so where people are getting frustrated, I'm always encouraging them to contact. And again, if people are in touch with any of you constituents in contact, they can always phone for advice, just to sort of, about how to keep young people safe while they are waiting.
And the reason for that, understaffed, under-resourced, or simply high need?
A combination. It's not under-resourced, actually. We've had a whole load of additional resource been put in, which is absolutely fantastic. But Hampshire have also had a whole load of resource put in, so we're fighting with them to fill posts sometimes. But there has been a significant rise in referrals recently. So that there are posts we are struggling to fill.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Judith.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I do think the amount of work that's gone in is extremely impressive. And I suppose this question is related a little bit to the discussion we had earlier about the Portsmouth Paradox. Are we monitoring the success of those initiatives in terms of outcomes for children? And would we know if we had less money next year, or if there was grants to apply for, how each one had actually done to improve outcomes for children? And I appreciate it's not just outcomes in terms of attainment. It's the Every Child Matters 5, those of us who remember that. And are we confident of, I mean, you know, it's a really impressive list of things we've been doing, but people who know me well will know that I'm not always satisfied with doing a lot. I want to see what the results are.
Yeah, no, that's a fair challenge. I mean, we obviously won't know the impact it's had in terms of attainment and progress, because we won't have that data until next year. But what we do have obviously is data around, for example, attendance, exclusions. That's and particularly focusing on our vulnerable learners. So, you know, we've put in, as we've discussed, a lot of support to track and monitor our vulnerable learners to make sure that they're in school, and if they're not in school, they're getting the support they need. And there we can, I think, show some impact, because if you compare our figures to national figures, we are doing better than many other local authorities in terms of attendance, despite the impact of the pandemic. So that we can demonstrate, which is good news. Now what we need to do is to make sure that we continue with that, and we can address some of the issues that we had a few years ago, where fixed term exclusions, for example, were just too high at secondary level. Now, I don't want to get back to that point. I think, you know, we need to build on what we've done this in the last 18 months, build on the things we've put in place, like the LA Link coordinators, and make sure that we can continue with those sort of good outcomes, and that obviously will then impact on attainment and progress. So we can demonstrate impact there, Judith, but in terms of the longer term improvements, we'll have to wait for that.
I mean, Judith, I don't know whether you were whether you just wanted to stick at a high level thing, but there are also some interventions that have happened, which actually we probably could get. I don't have the details of those at my fingertips, but I know sort of from feedback around some of the school-based interventions. Maybe Debbie can talk a little bit about that, and things like the statistics that I've seen around, for example, the literacy pirates, you know, that some of the data that was coming out of that from just having that specific intervention, because I think sometimes, I mean, the big picture stuff is really, really crucial. And we know that that it's complex, and we know that it's outside school influences as well as what goes on in school. But actually, sometimes drilling down to some tangible examples, for example, the Pompey Pirates, or the stuff we did with Hastings, you know, some of those, and some of the literacy interventions that have been done. I think that there are individual successes.
I think I was aiming towards those things as well, Susie. I think that's really important. I mean, I'd be very happy to see maybe at the next meeting a little bit of a quick table of all the different initiatives and interventions that we put in, with a kind of few ticks and crosses along the place about how effective they've been, because, you know, it's very difficult to decide in the future where funding should go, and it'll be in short supply. And I think a bit of a report or an overview would be really useful. I mean, the other question I had was the question of children missing school this term, particularly because of isolation and the sort of bubbles problem, as people are calling it. Because I've heard quite a few who are away from school, and I just wondered if we had statistics for that. What percentage of a children's year has and how does it vary much between schools and age and so forth? Because I get the impression that children are missing quite a lot of school, and that the sort of home education that was available during lockdown isn't consistently available for periods of isolation of, say, 10 days, when you can miss a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, we can give you those figures. We can break it down by year group, and you're right, there are a lot of children missing education in terms of being at school. They are getting an online education, but yeah, we know the difficulties and challenges associated with that, and as time has gone on, then that's become more and more challenging. So yeah, that will inevitably have an impact, and schools will be dealing with that. But yeah, if it's helpful, Judith, I can certainly give you the detailed data which shows you numbers that are missing education, and we can do that by year group. We've got all that data available. Yeah, and it's you know, and you probably see some of the national figures, you know, with up to sometimes a third of pupils, you know, out of school, which is you know, we're not quite in that sort of territory, but yeah, it's been a challenge over the last few weeks in particular.
I think it would be useful to see those figures.
Yeah, we can.
I mean, it doesn't have to be in minute detail because, of course, we can raise questions about things that seem to be interesting or anomalous. But I'm on the LOEB, and I think the local monitoring board, and I think the impact of this surge in infection is being underestimated generally.
Okay, no, I'll circulate those figures after the meeting. Yeah.
And do we have any fit knowledge about whether when people do go away, when a bubble is sent home, are they getting really good coverage of home education, or is that falling by the wayside? There's a sense of ennui at the end of this term. I appreciate that, but with I've heard of children going home and being just bored.
Well, I'd be disappointed if that is happening. I mean, the schools have got in place now a really good offer, and we've developed the system, the technology, access to devices. So we're in a good position to respond when a child has to self-isolate. So there shouldn't really be a situation where a child does not have good access to that education. Obviously, there may be challenges with some of those children who then choose not to access that education, and the parental support is not there. And obviously, we have to try and do our best in those sort of circumstances. And I think that's become more challenging. But there shouldn't be any excuse. That offer will be there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I can't see any other hands up, any questions. So some of the next report we've sort of touched on already, but I'll hand back to you, Mike, to present the education strategy refresh.
Yep. Okay, so I'll take you through this. I'll probably invite Debbie just to say a few words about some of the priorities, if that's okay. Debbie, I haven't given you forewarning on that, but particularly around peer review and digital and literacy, it would be good to get your input there. So we'll come to that later. But yeah, in summary, this report just sets out some of the changes we're making in terms of year 2 of the Portsmouth Education Strategy. So we're just coming towards the end of year 1, and at the last board meeting, also we gave you an update in terms of how we were doing in year 1 with a summary against each of the 10 priorities. What we're doing for year 2 is we're keeping with those 9 priorities, but we are adding a 10th priority, which is a focus on young people who are not in education, employment and training, so NEETs, because of the rise. And I'll talk a bit about that priority later. That went to the PEP Strategic Board at its last meeting and was endorsed by the board. But also, I want just to flag the fact that whilst we have 10 priorities for next year, and they're all important, by the way, and there's work behind all those 10 priorities. The board members at the last meeting wanted to really nail and focus on those priorities that are going to have the biggest impact. What is it that we really need to look at and prioritise going forward and to report back to the board on. And I wanted just to go through those four fundamental priorities that were agreed at the PEP Strategic Board. So when we rewrite the education strategy, refresh it for year 2, which we're doing at the moment, you'll see coming through that real emphasis on these 4 priorities. So that's the purpose of the paper. So if we just go to section 3, I'll just cover those 4 priorities which the PEP Strategic Board agreed a few weeks ago. The first one of those is around digital learning. So we talked a bit about this in the last report. We're going to build on what we've achieved over this last year, which has been phenomenal. It's been an amazing piece of work supported by the Thinking Schools Academy Trust. But all of our schools now, I think, in a much better position now to support digital learning, both in school and at home. But what we can't afford is for us to take our foot off this particular pedal either, because there could be a view amongst some colleagues that, all the kids are now back, we're coming out of the pandemic, we don't need to do that anymore, we can go back to the way we used to do things. Well, no, we can't. We want to build on what we've done and to reap the benefits of that and see that impact on outcomes in terms of attainment and progress. So we're now moving to the second stage of this work, and at the PEP Strategic Conference a couple of weeks ago, Natalie Shepherd from TSAT set out a digital learning vision and some of the work we want to do over the next few months to take it to the next sort of level. And that includes a number of roundtable discussions on particular themes that we're going to be running during the course of the autumn term, led by school leaders from across the city. It will also look at digital poverty to make sure that all children and young people have access to that device and the internet. And although we've done a lot of work over the last 12 months to improve that position, we want to obviously build on that and make sure that everybody has access going forward, and also make sure that they've got good access to the internet, not just at home but also in school. And you'll probably be aware of the local fibre network project whereby schools will now have access to super fast internet, and all schools will have the opportunity to join that network over the course of the next 2 years. So a really exciting development for schools. So we've given you some links in the report to the highlight report that went to the PEP Strategic Board, and we've also given you a link to the paper that was presented at the summer conference a few weeks ago. I'm not going to go through the detail of that because we just don't have sufficient time, but hopefully that gives you a pretty good summary of what we're doing. So that's the first priority. The second one is around peer review. And I'm going to hand over to Debbie just to take you through the work we've been doing over the last year to get us to the point we're at now. And we were able to share this at the PEP Summer Conference. So Debbie, do you want to say a few words about peer review?
Yes, of course. I mean, one of the great things about Portsmouth, it is highly collaborative, but if we're not careful, it can be very, very inward facing instead of outward facing. So hopefully peer review is a really good model to help schools collaborate, but also to support and challenge in a non-judgmental way that will work together to move practice on and to help schools to learn from each other. So I've worked on 2 peer review processes. One I've written in collaboration with our LA maintained schools, because our academies have a lot of quality assurance and peer review and processes that go on in their multi-academy trusts. Our LA maintained schools, unless they choose to buy into something like Challenge Partners, which is a national organisation where you can undertake peer review nationally, or agreeing to do it sort of locally in their clusters, they don't have the same sort of processes. And if you're a very small infant school, it can be very costly. So in collaboration with the LA Maintained Schools heads, we've written a process, and in fact every LA Maintained school moving forward has signed up to it from September. So that is part of what their senior leaders agreeing to have a review of their own school, but also going out and being part of teams, not necessarily teams with people from their own school, but mixing up the teams with me potentially leading some reviews as well, going out into other LA maintained schools, focusing on lines of inquiry that are in people's school improvement plans that will look at how well are things going, that do focus on outcomes. What are you doing in your school improvement plan? Why are you doing that? Let's see an action. Why is that happening? This is what we've noticed. And then discussing together how it can be better and using the networks that we have from those teams to then build up CPD and to learn from each other. So we have a peer review process for the LA maintained schools, but also for across the Portsmouth Education Partnership, we want to tap into peer review. So for some of the multi-academy trusts, they might say, well, actually, we have a peer review process. We're happy for some other people from other schools, from the LA maintained schools, to join those teams, to be on those. Or the LA maintained schools have their peer review process. Actually, we'd like an expert. We know there's somebody in one of those Academy Trust schools that we'd like on the review team. So we're using the principles around peer review to make the one across the Portsmouth Education Partnership. If you're already doing one, it's got the flexibility to invite other people in, but it does have to have a focus on, say, our disadvantaged children, as I say, what's in school improvement plans, and on achieving impact. So it is quite exciting. I'm quite excited for the LA maintained schools and to schedule all of that in over the summer to make that happen over the next 3 terms. But also to work with the multi-academy trusts to set that up so that we are looking outwards, but using what we've got, the best of what we've got in Portsmouth, to help us reflect and improve on what's going on.
Great, thank you, Debbie. So that covers our peer review, and I'm going to ask Debbie actually just to talk a bit about the next one. So we've also agreed as one of our 4 priorities to really focus on is around literacy. And we know if you go back to 2019, one of the areas that we were really concerned about, particularly Key Stage 2, was literacy outcomes. We've made some good improvements around maths, and the Solent Maths Hub has been really supportive there around math mastery, and we've actually seen some good improvements there. But literacy was still a concern based on those figures, and that goes back also to early years as well. So, Debbie, do you want to just maybe just flesh out some of the key things we're doing around literacy?
So this year we set up an early language and literacy development group across the Portsmouth Education Partnership. Although it's got early in the title, it is not just focused on early years. So we've done some work to refresh what we had around a Portsmouth early language plan on a page. That's totally been retitled as a Portsmouth commitment to early language. And I think the fact that it's got commitment in it says an awful lot. And there's strands around what, it's almost like expectations, what we would expect families to be doing for the development of early language, what we expect the local authority to be doing, what we expect of our schools and our early years settings, what we would expect of culture and leisure to be doing around libraries and parks and our museums. So that whole top layer page has been refreshed, and that group has worked on that. And then we're looking at having layers underneath that to say, well, okay, if we agree that as an expectation in principle, what does that look like in reality? So we're looking to unpick the next layers. So that's a piece of work that group is doing, particularly as a strand around the early years and language development from the beginning. We've also looked at reading in particular. And when I first took up post in September, we were given the opportunity to twin with Hastings. Hastings and East Sussex are an opportunity area. They get millions of pounds invested to improve their outcomes. But to receive their millions, they had to do a little bit of twinning with some other people. So we were offered a tiny crumb of the amount of their money to do a project, which I grabbed. They said they wanted it on maths. We said, no, we don't need maths. We'd rather have something on literacy. So what it's enabled me to do this year is to have 10 of our Key Stage 2 schools undertake a programme called Destination Reader. And this is where, Terry, you talk about proven outcomes. So Destination Reader is written by Hackney Learning Trust. And I've been to a Hackney school which is surrounded on all sides by those tower blocks, and they're achieving incredible outcomes. So the programme is written by Hackney Learning Trust. It's not a scheme. It is definitely not a reading scheme. It is much more about high quality teaching of reading, really understanding that pedagogy. It's about the different strands of reading, about teachers using high quality texts, encouraging a love of reading as well, about using oracy and the development of vocabulary. So I was able to offer that to 10 of our Key Stage 2 schools this year. They've done a baseline audit with children and staff, and they're just about to revisit it again end of July for me before they break up, because I have to go back to Hastings, who've given us this money to do it, to account for it. But one of the schools has described it as a game changer. Actually, the teachers are really enthused. The children are absolutely loving reading. And although you can't compare attainment now to 2019 because it's very different, what they're looking at is progress across that time. And they're saying the progress that those children are making now, despite the lockdowns and the pandemic, is really being affected by this programme. So I'm willing to share the report that I put into Hastings once it's done, and you're welcome to have sight of that next time. But Hastings have come back to us. They're getting millions more next year. They've come back and said, we will twin with you again next year. So I've got the potential to put another 10 of our Key Stage 2 schools on this programme. So that's what I'm doing at the moment, scoping who I can ask to do it, to take it on that fits with what they're doing. Within that money, I've also got the chance, and this is quite, I suppose, innovative. Hackney Learning Trust haven't used Destination Reader in secondary schools, but they are willing to work with us to design potentially it going into year 7. So the impact of every secondary school teacher is also a teacher of reading, regardless of whether they're geography, science, PE, whatever. Those children need to be able to read well and fluently to access their subject. So at the moment, we've managed to work together. They've agreed to do it. I've got 2 Portsmouth secondary schools, well, one all through, you'll be really pleased to hear, Terry, and another secondary school that are willing to trial that and pilot it and work with Hackney Learning Trust to actually design and innovate that programme to fit into Year 7. So I think that's a massive opportunity next year, taking that reading forward. And also, if any of those children have been in Year 6 and had Destination Reader this year, they're also transitioning with the same principles going into Year 7. So we've worked on that. The Early Language and Literacy Development Group have also worked on putting together a Portsmouth approach to reading, which is a document to go on the Portsmouth Education Partnership website, which unpicks some of the different strands of reading, the science of reading, why you need to use high quality texts with children, about systematic synthetic teaching of phonics programs and what that means. We've also had part of it written by the Vision Hearing and Impairment Service. So what does it mean for children who might have those special educational needs and disabilities? The Ethnic Minority Achievement Service have written a section on what is it like for EAL children and reading. So hopefully that's going to be a reference point, a point where teachers can go, I just need to know a bit about it. There's some information in those different sections, but also some further reference points and research as well. So hopefully that's another development around reading as well. So we've done an awful lot considering that September through the lockdown and happening, but we know there's a huge way to go. And what we want to see is as you've said, the results, the impact, the improved outcomes at Key Stage 2 reading in particular.
Thanks,
Jeanette,
yeah, I can see this question.
Yeah, Jeanette, was this in relation to the literacy, or? Yeah, you go ahead then.
Okay, and it goes back to my question about attainment, really. I think most of us on screen have been around education a long time, and I've heard different versions of the same thing to try and raise attainment and literacy and even sort of maths as well. How confident are we that this set of initiatives will work, and how are we going to measure them? And when do we get the report back to say that they're sort of measures? Because I've seen loads of initiatives and I've never received a report back about the final outcomes and whether they worked or not. So when do we get it for this one, this set initiative?
Well, I have to do a termly monitoring report, obviously because I've had to bid for this money for Destination Reader. So you're welcome to see the reports that I send back termly. They're there. You know, I'm just about to write this second one. Obviously, we won't know about the next one until into the future. The other reports that you might want to see are Pompey Pirates. So Pompey Pirates work with disadvantaged children. It's a reading initiative again, and they send in some termly reports. So I'm just looking on my screen. There's a Term 2 impact report that goes up to April 2021. Which says 70% of their students improved their reading age between September and April. The average improvement was an increase of 11 months. 35% of the students at Pompey Pirates improved their reading age by a year or more between September and April, with some making an improvement of over 2 years. So again, I'm happy to send you that Pompey Pirates report because that has got numbers and a real some number crunching bits on it for you.
If you can, that'd be great, because what we should be doing is crowing from the rooftops if something's working, rather than keeping it to ourselves, because that gets the ball rolling. And you know, initiatives look like they're working, then they expand and they get better. And I'm really heartened to hear that. You know, that there's been an improvement of 11 months. That's an enormous improvement. But I didn't know, and that's the thing. And I think we need to sort of start shouting our successes a lot more than we do.
Before I go to Terry, can I make a suggestion that maybe that Mike in this meeting that we select a couple, because it sounds like there's a desire to see some more kind of specific examples rather than just a general reporting back. So maybe we could pick the key headline reports around some of these measures that we've been mentioning today, so that it becomes part of a report back.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Thank you. Terry?
Thank you. Yeah, so just to pick up on the Pompey Pirate stuff. So did you say we were offering that to all schools?
No, at the moment it's only to some schools that buy into it, but it is part of the Cultural Education Partnership and it is funded in other ways as well. But they are looking to expand. It has been so successful that obviously they've got one site at the moment. I know they're looking at potentially another site in the sort of central part of the city and maybe one in the north of the city as well. So
right.
Yeah,
thank you. And sorry, Mike.
I was just going to reinforce what Debbie said there. You know, because of its success and the feedback we've had from schools and the waiting list we've got for Pompey Pirates, yeah, we absolutely do want to see that expanded. So, yeah, as Debbie said, we've got an aspiration of having 3 hubs across the city.
Thank you, Debbie. And I think Mike, and I think the Hastings stuff sounds really, really positive. I think that's where I'm coming from, really. For the last few years, I've asked, what is it with attainment? Why are we so far behind? And we've heard, it's lack of ambition and it's parental engagement. But yet, through oracy and things I've seen in schools where, for instance, at parents' evenings, you have 20% of the parents bother to turn up or engage or don't come in, but through oracy they've increased that to 80% with just the students alone. So the students are taking responsibility even if their parents aren't pushing them and those kind of things. I know without this becoming kind of buzzword bingo, I think those sort of things lead to employability, don't they? And that sounds positive, so great, thank you.
Right, as an ex-head of the city of an outstanding school, I certainly don't lack ambition, and I have only been in post since September.
Yeah. No, there's some good stuff going on. It would be remiss of me not to take this opportunity to encourage anyone on here who wants to volunteer for Pompey Pirates to do so, because I did at the beginning. I did for one term, and it is so rewarding. It's a brilliant scheme, and a lot of it, coming back to what we were talking about before, we talk about really crude measurements, but actually often it's the relationships and it's the ratios, and actually being able to work with some of those kids on really exciting projects and actually just see them developing this love of learning just because you're sitting with them and talking with them and nurturing that. It's a brilliant scheme, so or setup. So please step up and volunteer, or ask other people if they want to volunteer. Right, I shall hand back to Mike.
Yes, okay. So turning to the 4th priority, which we agreed at the PEP Strategic Board, which was around improving school attendance and in particular reducing fixed-term exclusions. And we've given a link to the paper that was presented at that board meeting. And it was a fairly blunt paper because we set out the figures from 2019 when we've got all the comparative data and how we are doing against national figures, but also our statistical neighbours, and that data is worrying, particularly at secondary level. Primary, we've seen some improvements, but nevertheless there are still concerns there also, and really putting a sort of a call for action, really, to say, look, we've got to do something about this. We've got some really good programs in place. We've been doing some great work around restorative practice, which we've been training our schools in, and we want to extend and roll that out further. But how can we collectively come together to really bring these figures down, because they are just not good enough? And we've seen also, disappointingly, over the last term, fixed term exclusion starting to go up again. But there are some great examples out there. So at the PEP Summer Conference, Claire Copeland from Trafalgar School set out what they've been doing over the past year or more to reduce their fixed term exclusions. I mean, they had, I think, in total, was it 1 or 2 in the last few months. They've brought it down significantly, and restorative practice has been at the heart of their work. So there are some great examples out there, but we are seeing in some other schools where those fixed term exclusions are going up, and there's a more punitive approach being taken. And what we would like to do is to have effectively, I guess, a protocol, really, where we can agree a collective protocol to put in place measures where we can reduce these fixed term exclusions. We've done it before against other areas. So take permanent exclusions. Way back, I think in 1997, we were bottom of the 151 local authorities for permanent exclusions. We're now in the top 10%, I think. We have very few permanent exclusions because of the protocol we developed and the processes we now have in place. We've done some amazing work around elective home education. We've had a protocol there in place, which has meant that where we've had far less children being deregistered for often the wrong reasons, because parents are dissatisfied with the school, so they think home education is the way to go, when patently it's not. And what we need to do is address the issues at the school, and also remind parents about their responsibilities if they are going to go down that home education route. And we've reduced that significantly, so we're in a much better position now. And I think we probably could say in the past there were some examples of off-rolling. This is at its worst. I think I can say hand on heart now, we do not have that in the city. So it can be done. Collectively, we can do these things, and we want to have this focus on fixed term exclusions. And at the PEP Summer Conference, we had Mark Finnis, our guest speaker, who's been supporting our work around restorative practice, and he gave some great examples of the way he's worked with schools around this agenda. Hull being one good example, where they had very high rates of fixed term exclusions. He worked with a cluster of schools around restorative practice, brought those exclusions down. That was then extended to the whole of the city, and now Hull and the local authority there can now point to some of the lowest fixed term exclusions in the country. And we want to see the same in Portsmouth. So a big focus there. It's worth probably just covering some of the other work we're doing around attendance. So we did recently held an attendance workshop with our schools, and we had a really significant number. I think 35 schools turned up to that, and we looked at particular focus on our attendance campaign. So our attendance campaign, Miss School, Miss Out, we've effectively put that on pause during the pandemic, and we've obviously focused on welcome back to school and ready to learn, those sort of campaigns. But now we're hopefully coming out of this pandemic, we are going to return to that campaign, and we're going to also return to the theme of what could you become, those images that we had showing what the potential careers you could go into, and how important it is to attend school. We're not going to go with the shark images that we had last time around, which we think is probably inappropriate now. So we're going to go more along the lines of benefits to well-being, a sense of belonging, of attending school, that kind of imagery. So a lot of work is taking place to relaunch that campaign in the autumn, and we'll be developing those plans over the summer. As well as that, there's a whole range of other work that's going on. So one piece of work is around health-related absence. We've been partnering with a number of schools, a health-related absence project with Solent NHS Trust, where we've had dedicated school nurses supporting attendance, because one of the main reasons for absence is health-related. And in many cases, actually, there's no reason why those children cannot come into school. And by having a dedicated nurse supporting that, we've been able to bring down those figures in those schools that took part in the pilot. So what we're now going to do is to extend that citywide, probably on the basis of a traded service, although we are looking at trying to get some funding from the CCG to support that. But that is another key work for us. The LA Link coordinators, you're probably aware now, they are now permanently in post. We obviously assembled a whole range of link coordinators during the early stages of the pandemic, with staff who were doing the kind of work they would have normally done because of the pandemic. They've now been made permanent. We've got 3 coordinators, and they are now focusing particularly on chronic non-attenders. So these are children with below 50% attendance, and working really closely with schools on obviously the early help and prevention service to address chronic non-attendance, which is still a big issue for us. And what else? We're continuing to challenge schools around reduced timetables. So any reduced timetable that goes beyond 6 weeks, they get a letter from me where we ask about why is it going beyond 6 weeks, what's the plan in place to bring them back into full-time education, and we're not going to take our step off that pedal either, and we've seen improvements there, so we'll continue with that work. So yeah, those are just some of the highlights really in terms of what we're doing to improve attendance and reduce fixed term exclusions, and that was, as I say, endorsed by the board as a key priority as part of those 4 priorities I've just gone through. So if I just go, if there's any, you might have some questions at this point, because what I'm going to do next is just take you through the 10th priority, which we've added to the strategy around NEETs. But are there any questions any further questions in relation to those 4 priorities we've just gone through? Nope. Shall I move on then? So section 4 of the report deals with our 10th priority, so reducing the proportion of young people not in education, employment and training.
Jeanette, sorry, Mike. Jeanette's just come in. No, she was keeping to the rules about how to ask to speak.
Yeah, and I couldn't type RTS quick enough. You moved on, Mike. So
that's all right. No, carry on.
It was just about attendance and how that's been affected by COVID, and also how it's going to be affected by COVID.
Lost her.
I'll tell you. Should we wait till she comes back? Do you want to move on, Mike, with and then we can come back to that?
Yep, come back to that
question afterwards.
Yep, that's okay. So section 4 deals with this 10th priority, and what we've done, we've given some background to our statutory duties around young people participating in education beyond the age of 16, and how we have to track and monitor that. And by the way, the tracking and monitoring is really, really good in this local authority. I mean, we have a very, very small percentage of children who we're not sure about their destination, something like 0.5%, whereas in other authorities it's significantly higher. So just to say, that's really strong here. And in that background, we've given some of the work we've done over the last sort of 10 years really, or since 2013, to bring down those NEET figures, because they were unacceptably high back in 2013. You know, we were looking at figures of nearly 8% in terms of NEETs, and unknowns were at nearly 19%. We were really in a shocking position. So we completely reviewed that program. We put in something called the Youth NEET Prevention Program, which is a collaborative program involving our secondary schools and colleges, whereby we have our careers and progression advisors attached to those young people in year 11 who are, you know, wobbly, vulnerable to not getting a positive post-16 destination, and then working with them, not just in terms of the when they're in year 11, but also through the summer holiday period and into their destination, where the careers progression advisor would continue to work with them for that first term to make sure that they were settled and would stay in education. And that had a dramatic impact on bringing those figures down to the point where we got them down to something like 3.5%. So that was a phenomenal effort, and was testimony to the collaborative effort that we put in place. Having said that, we've seen those figures starting to creep up over the last few years, and we know that as a result of the pandemic, those figures have increased further. Variety of reasons for that. The pandemic obviously has not helped, and so therefore we are going to renew our emphasis on those NEET figures, which is why we're making this our 10th priority. In section 4.2, we've just set out what we are currently doing. So I've mentioned the Youth NEET Prevention Programme. We also have some ESF funding for something called the STEP programme, which is going to come to end eventually, but that gives some more dedicated support for NEETs. We've got the Southern University Network programme, which we've used to good effect. The Virtual School and College have employed a careers and progression advisor to focus on care leavers and looked after children. We have now the Youth Hub, which is a DWP funded service for 16 to 25-year-olds who are claiming universal credit to help them seek employment. Doesn't really have much of an impact on our NEET figures because it tends to be mainly 18 plus there. And we've also invested in the Flying Start program, which I talked about in the last report. So a lot of work still going on, and we'll continue with that. But in section 4.3, we set out some of the new actions we want to put in place to really ratchet up our work here. So one is around establishing a network of year 11 progression leads in schools to make sure that we are working really closely with our schools and they've got a really good handle on the resources that are available, the support that's available to help them in transition, and that is being set up as we speak. We're also looking at the offer. One of the issues we've had over the last few years is we've seen some of the provision that is most needed. So this roll-on, roll-off provision, for example, particularly in the centre of the city, we've seen some of that significantly reduced, which has had an impact. I mean, one provider, Catch 22, unfortunately, they closed their operation in the city, and that was really disappointing because it was a really important piece of provision for us. So we're looking to see if we can secure that provision that we need to support our needs, and the merger of Portsmouth and Highbury colleges does offer a really big opportunity to address that and put that provision we need in the centre of Portsmouth, as well as working with other providers like Prince's Trust, the military college, and other training providers. So big area of work there. We also want to make sure that we are supporting all professionals, practitioners who are working with young people, so particularly in children's social care, in early help and prevention, to make sure that this is on their agenda and they are getting the support and resources they need to be able to support young people that they are working with, or signpost them to other services. We're going to review the Youth Need Prevention Programme, so although it's a very successful programme, we are looking to see how we can improve it even further, extend its capacity, working with schools and colleges, and we're taking a proposal to the Post-16 Forum in autumn 2021, so next term, in terms of how we might expand that programme even further. We also have something called the Windmills ICANN programme, which is supporting schools and colleges across the city, which supports the careers guidance that we give young people. A really good programme which we've trained careers advisors in schools with, and that's working well, but we want to extend that further. And I think that covers some of the sort of key actions. So that's priority 10. As I say, it was endorsed by the PEP Strategic Board. We know those figures are worrying, and this is our plan of action to try and bring those figures down. I'll pause there because I'm just going to go on to the next steps, but you might have some questions around needs.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Are there any questions around the extra priority? Does anyone want to say? Judith?
I mean, I'm glad to see that extra priority because, in a sense, you know, being in employment or training at the end of your school is the sum outcome of, you know, it's a key outcome measure. So that's, I'm glad to see that. I get it, you know, I really don't want to be critical because I know there are some really good things going on. But during that last piece, Mike, I just had a kind of depressing feeling that you're saying this is going really well, but the results are not good. So how can they all be going really well, in a sense? You know, if the results, if needs were diminishing, then you can say with confidence that everything we're doing is doing really well. But and you've, you know, a lot of the things you talked about are things that we need to do more of.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm a bit nervous about flogging dead horses, really. Because they're expensive, some of these things. I'm sounding rather critical, but I'm
no,
not.
That's right. I'm up for the challenge, Judith.
But you know, I think some of those you might need to have a real look at and say, you know, actually, we're not going to do this anymore because it isn't really working, and we'll put some of that resource somewhere to a project that is working very well, say elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is about, I mean, some of what I've just talked about, you know, has clearly worked and has had good success. The pandemic is clearly driving some of these increases, and I think without some of these programs in place, we would be in a far worse position than than the way we are in, and many other local authorities have higher rates than we have. So. You know, so although it's a bit of a depressing picture, what I can say is if we didn't have this in place, then we would be in a really difficult position. What we're looking to do is to build on what we've done, extend it even further, extend that capacity. Yeah, and that's why I think there is some really good work, and we can evidence that impact. And if you, as I say, if you make those comparisons with other similar local authorities, we are in a pretty good position. And that tracking and monitoring of young people, the fact we've got so few that we don't know where they are, really helps with that endeavour. So, yeah, I'm not ducking the fact that these figures are worrying and that we need to do more. But I absolutely will not. I would not recommend looking to reduce or change any of the programs that we have been putting forward because they have had impact.
Okay.
What I would say also is that funding is a big issue for some of these programs. So we tend to rely on external funding. A lot of these services are struggling with funding. So that is another issue just to alert members to. But yeah, we're doing the best we can with limited resources.
Thank you, Mike. Before you go on to the next step, should we go back to, I think we've got Jeanette back in the room.
Oh, yes, the previous question. Yeah.
So the previous question around the impact of COVID on attendance.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I just got kicked out. But perhaps it's trying to tell me something. Anyway, it was about COVID and the impact on attendance during lockdown, but also coming out of lockdown. Are we going to get a false picture? And if that's the case, how long for?
When you say a false picture, do you mean it's
just it's all about the pandemic.
Yeah.
People can't pupils can't attend because of
I see. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Things and parents pulling them out of school, and whether that's going to be an influence in the figures for so long that we're not really going to know what the true picture is. Yeah,
I mean, that's certainly with the figures we've got at the moment. If we look back over the last year, some of the figures, they don't look particularly good, and obviously it's got a lot to do with the pandemic and the fact we've had so many children having to self-isolate. So they can be misleading. That is absolutely true, and we'll have a much better picture of what attendance is looking like next year. So I think we'll take that into account when we provide those figures. But this is not unique to Portsmouth. Of course, if you make those comparisons with other local authority areas, the same sort of trends are taking place. So, yeah, you've got to be careful about what you read into those figures from the last 18 months. But I think the set of figures that we'll have for next year will be a really true reflection of what's going on out there. And as I say, I'm hoping that as a result of the work we've done and what we've put in place, we'll see an improvement in overall attendance when you compare it to what it was pre-pandemic.
Jeanette, if I can just add to that, which is the opposite end of the scale, and Judith knows that I'm interested in this from an outbreak group, is the impact of potentially of long COVID on children. And so we are really mindful of that, because whilst there really does need to be a rigor in terms of challenging perhaps people who have become very cautious about school, who could easily, with that support and help from the school, be getting their kids back into school. And I think we've got anecdotal evidence that some families have become, I suppose, socialised into being overcautious, let's put it that way. But actually, equally, there are some really poorly kids around. And the evidence that we know around long COVID is that actually they shouldn't be forced back into a full-time, and so I think it has to be a case-by-case basis, but both of those things are equally important. So I just thought I'd put that out there at this point. It's going to be a complex approach to the attendance a campaign that we're gonna put into place. Mike, do you want to finish off with the next steps?
Sorry, on mute. Yes, so very briefly, next steps. So having had the endorsement by the PEP Strategic Board in terms of those 4 areas of focus and the 10th priority, we're now currently updating the strategy. So we'll have a year 2 strategy ready for September, and hopefully we'll conclude that in the next few weeks, which will incorporate all of what you've heard today, and also we'll just have a brief summary about the progress we made against each priority within year 1. So that will be available, and we'll circulate that to board members in a few weeks' time. And that's it. You're on mute, Susie.
Oh, damn, I nearly got through a whole meeting without doing that. Any other questions for Mike or anyone else? Any of the other officers? Any comments about those reports? I've just realised before Anna chases me down that I think I was meant to formally say that there was a recommendation for the first report that members of the Education Advisory Board note the actions that have been taken over the past 16 months by the Council and partners to respond to the pandemic and the ongoing work that is in place in order to continue to support education settings. I'm assuming that we all are in support of noting that, and that on this second report that we note the agreed focus of the PEP Strategic Board for year 2 of the strategy, the inclusion of an additional priority to the education strategy that focuses on needs as set out in section 4, and the next steps and the refresh of the education strategy for year 2 as set out in section 5. So I'm assuming we all agree to note those. Any other comments or business? Jeanette?
Just to say, as it's the end of the meeting, obviously it's Alison Jeffrey's last meeting and she's not here. I would just like to pass on my thanks to her for all her hard work and wish her well for the future. She's worked tirelessly for education in Portsmouth and children and families, and I think we will miss that enthusiasm for the sector. But I wish her well, and hopefully she will go on to do as greater things in her new post as she has done here.
Thank you, Jeanette. And I can see some thumbs up and agreement from the other members, and I completely endorse that. And she has left us in a good shape. So and leaving behind a great team. So that's the most positive we can take out of that. So she didn't join the meeting in the end, but I'm sure that we will get that message to her, and I'm sure there'll be other opportunities to thank her again over the next few weeks. So that just leaves us with item 6, which is the date of the next meeting, which is the 13th of October at 4 p.m. I expect we'll be meeting in person then, but hey, I'm not going to. Who knows? We keep thinking that. So that's the date of the next meeting. If there is no one else wants to say anything, thank you so much. Particular thanks to the officers for writing those reports, which were really informative, and thank you all, and I bid you a good night.
Thanks, everybody.
I'll turn the live stream off now. You're still audible for a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Anna.
Okay.